So this piece is recommended to be taken at 96, but what I would recommend is that I'll put 96 on here. So that's quite fast. So as I did with the earlier versions, I recommend playing this very slowly with your metronome for a while. And then over time, gradually start to play with the tempo slightly. But what we want to hear with this is a really definitive tempo, a definitive pulse. Can the pulse be discerned from your playing? So working with the metronome and then turning the metronome off over time will help us to, not us, but help you to develop a nice even pulse. Let's work through this piece little by little, talking primarily, I think, about the use of the metronome, number one, number two, about articulations, number three, about the left hand in the second half. So there's a lot of positioning of the left hand to enable us to play those large leap passages. And then I guess overall, let's just make sure we don't forget about musicianship and phrasing. So once we get all our correct notes and our articulations, it's still not music unless we're putting some shapes to the phrases with our dynamics. This is not really marked with dynamics at this point. So what we can do, it has a few crescendos, decrescendos, or actually let me see, one decrescendo and crescendo, decrescendo in bar 15. But what about if we add a few according to the direction of the line? So say if we start in the beginning, and again, coming back to all the sort of sequence of things we'll work on, number one, using your metronome starting at a slow tempo. So you're working on precision. So if I start at 70, and that may even be too fast, so it's okay to even say if I put the metronome on 80 and now do it in half tempo. So 80 would be, whoops. So I would suggest doing it like that for a while till you get the sense of the evenness of the pulse. You're tying the first three notes together and tonguing the fourth one. So ya da ya da. So instead of, I have a little bit of a bubble in here. So now that sounds very, very clipped, but when we play this faster, for instance, say at 96, so what I'm doing is essentially the articulation process for me is to put my tongue on the reed, blow the air, have a nice good reservoir of air from down below. And then when I go to expel the air, my tongue is on the reed and I gently take the tongue off and very gently but rapidly put it back. So essentially you're getting a sense of, or a feeling of, all with one breath. And the faster the notes are, the faster the articulations are, the harder it is for us to decide or define which was the beginning of an articulation and the end, or the end of a note. So essentially, the end of one note is the beginning of the other at faster tempos like this. So we can think through articulation in terms of the patterning of where our tongue should be on or off the reed. But when it comes to faster passages like this, I just like to recommend, number one, make sure you're blowing your air. Do not think that the articulation is dependent only on the tongue. There has to be a good amount of air blown. Number two, and remember from down low too, as well. Remember that ya da 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 is all one phrase. So I'm thinking phrasing wise, getting into our musicianship here, that I'm going up to the B, up to that note there, and then all of these notes in the second bar, the F sharp, the C sharp, are just little embellishments. They're little lower neighbors. So I'm just putting my tongue on them. Do articulate as they're marked. And then the end of that that second bar, beat 2, I'm doing a little bit of a crescendo into there. So if I play this all very, very evenly, and I like to use the metronome a lot, but I also like to turn it off so that I can train myself to hear the pulse. Or instead of where I was playing them a little longer and a little bit just more even sound, volume-wise. Now, this leaves us room for some creativity on your part. Execute all the notes, execute all the articulations, execute all of that with a really nice even pulse, but use some creativity in the dynamic area if you like. If we go forward, you can have an option of bar 2 and bar 4 to do some dynamic contrast, because it's kind of similar. Bar 2 and bar 4, kind of these little lower neighbors. So if I play the beginning from 1 through 5, I could probably put a crescendo in there. Something like that. Bar 6, I'm using a chromatic F sharp, which is our thumb and the bottom right side 2 keys. On bar 7, we're using a chromatic, where it's starting with an E to a D, which is a major second or a whole step, and then it does a little bit of a chromatic passage, but don't get caught, because at the end of bar 7, it goes from B flat to A to G, so there's no A flat in there. So just make sure you know what your hands are doing there. I also would note, and I didn't note this earlier, but I should say this, I should have said this, but I will say, what key signature is it? It's G major. It's the G major scale. This particular etude, if you look at the last note of the whole etude, is G. Not of this excerpt of the etude. We are only playing up to bar 31, which is a low B. But this is in G major, and if you know your G major scale, and the arpeggio, this will help us a lot in this particular piece. Okay, so again, working through with the metronome, with articulations, and adding some dynamics. And I'm going to use a general rule of thumb that if you're making a line is ascending, that you probably can make a crescendo, and then when it's descending, you could possibly make a decrescendo. Although on the descending lines, sometimes there actually is going to be a chord change, a harmony change, and I like to do a nice crescendo into that harmony change. Let's try a couple of things. I'm going to try playing a couple of phrases from around 5 up through around, I guess, well, we'll see where we go up to. But what I want to experiment with is how tempo affects how we're going to use our dynamics. So if I play it at a slower tempo, I might do something with the dynamics, make some choices. If I play it at a faster tempo or an even faster tempo, I might even make different choices with the dynamics. So the dynamics for you are going to be dependent upon what your comfort tempo is. Remember that the second half that we're going to get to in one moment is actually quite technical, a lot of left-hand work. So if you're finding that you can play the first half really well, but the second half is slower, don't play the whole thing at 2 different tempos. Choose the tempo that you can execute the whole thing reasonably cleanly at. So let's try a couple of phrasing dynamic ideas from 5. I'm going to get back into it from 4. So I'm going to do a little crescendo into there. And I think what I'm doing here is I'm crescendoing from 10 to 11. So let me back up again with some dynamics. 5. All that's about even for me, but I'm accenting a little bit the articulated notes. I don't want to over accent them, but I want the listener to hear that that is separated. So if I did them a little too long, and I said D, 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 D instead of T, T, so I'm going to try to leave them on the shorter side. Bar 6, I'm using a right-handed C sharp. So many times I find students will use the left-handed B, the right-handed C, and then the left-handed C sharp, and they don't ever really get comfortable with the right-handed C sharp. So remember, we have a left-handed B, a right-handed C, but we also have a right-handed B and a left-handed C, and then the same as well as with the C sharps, a left-handed C sharp and a right-handed C sharp. So I'm going to use in bar 6, and get used to using that right C sharp once in a while. In bar 7, now I'm using left hand C sharp here to right hand C. And probably a crescendo down to that low F sharp. Let's see context wise. And I'll come back to always be thinking ahead, a little bit of a tempo. So if we pull it back to 80, so I'm wanting to really feel pulses of quarter notes at that tempo. Yup, da da da, dee da da da, dee da da da, dee da da da. As if those 2, 3, and 4th, second, third, and fourth 16th notes are leading into the next beat. Bump, dee dee dee, dee da da da, dee da da da, dump, something like that. When I do that little scale in bar 7, it's a funny scale because it's a combination of whole steps and half steps. It's not, like I said earlier, a full chromatic scale. So what we should do is, what I do is take my right thumb. I laugh because these are not really technical pieces of advice as much as just more from a performer's standpoint, what I try to do to make the rhythm even, for instance, or the note to articulate correctly. In this case, I take my right thumb and I push it a little higher, a little firmer, that I want to grip the instrument, because as I let go of the instrument, essentially with a B natural, I'm fully holding onto the instrument with all the fingers. When I go to B flat, then to A and to G, essentially all that's being held at this point is the fulcrum here of my embouchure here, which I'm trying not to bite, but just to have it wedged in here and gripped with my thumb a little bit so it's holding, but I'm really not holding the instrument with my fingers anymore. So if I'm playing at a fast tempo and I let go of all the fingers of the keys of the rings, there's a risk of the instrument kind of wobbling slightly, and that can cause a little bit of unevenness of rhythm. So what I do to counteract that is I take my right thumb and push up a little bit, we go forward to bar 11, and now if you're playing it at a slower tempo, you may need to grab some breaths all throughout here, and what I'm recommending is do the best you can to get a very quick breath. You may disrupt the rhythm ever so slightly, the pulse so slightly, but I would rather do that than fully leave a note out, although when I was doing some demonstrations earlier, I think I did leave some notes out once in a while. Let me go from 11. And we can feel that the melody notes are from 11 to 12 to 13. So and let's just take one quick look at bar 12. D sharp to front F sharp to A. If your hand, when you drop your hand like this and you raise it up, you relax it, you kind of wiggle it around, let the fingers really relax, lift it up to the elbow. Now the fingers are slightly curved like this. Now, if they're coming in at a slight angle and here at a slight angle, and I'll talk about the hand position also in a second regarding the second half of this etude. Now, I can touch the front F sharp key here as well as kind of just roll up to the A key. So when I'm playing D sharp to F sharp to A, I have a lot less motion here. Now, to give you an idea of what later on in the piece, when we get to the second half, I actually have a lot of large leaps. So what I'm probably going to do is actually, and I said this for the slow video too, the slow piece, I'm going to shift my left hand down a little bit more, not exactly perpendicular, but a little bit flatter. So, and a little bit more even, because it gives me the ability to kind of cross the registers a little easier. So the lesson, I think, is use this relaxed curved, always want to have a curve to it to a certain extent, but that angle down as a starting point, but allow your hands to adapt to the phrases that you're trying to play. So don't be so like rigid that you have to have exact hand position all the time for every type of music. Overall, what you're trying to do is minimize the motion and make the notes come out nice and smooth and evenly. Okay, so we'll go from, say, 11, and I'm also putting a slight tenuto over the beginning of each note, so da 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 da. Now I'm experimenting with some different ways. That second one I just really did accents. Let me see if I can just do a tenuto without the accent. So I probably, again, depending on the speed that you play this at, you're just striving primarily for evenness of rhythm. And again, we're sort of letting go of the instrument a little bit here, less fingers on it. So we're going to have to probably just, again, use this right thumb pushing up a little bit and just work with your metronome a little bit. 15 and 16, 17, we have more of this, these scales where they're, let's see, chromatic pretty much throughout, except for some arpeggios. So at 15, so I'm using a chromatic F sharp down at the bottom there, and the same at the top. So I'm coming from an A flat, G, and instead of my middle finger F sharp, I'm using this chromatic fingering like this. And then when I come out from A here, these bottom side two keys plus this thumb here. Okay, the second half. So we can do lots of things on dynamics here. I'm trying to keep my fingers as close as I can to the keys. Not an experiment, but like a technique, or maybe just a way, a mode of practicing might be to experiment with if your right hand or your left hand can get down slightly sooner. Now, you won't necessarily do this in a performance, but what it does is if you put your right hand down, say, on bar 20 on that B, on B2, slightly earlier than it should be going down, you'll get a sense in your fingers and hands what that physically feels like. And then if you try to put it down a little bit late, meaning like sort of the other fingers go down earlier, then your left hand, then you're gonna end up getting the physical feeling of that. So what I'm saying is that you're trying to develop not only an awareness of playing the correct notes, but having the hands feel the combinations, the movement, one interval to the next. By the way, intervals and music theory are just absolutely paramount in this piece, all the pieces. But if you know what intervals you're playing, they sort of outline the melody in this piece. So in this second half, bar 20, is kind of one of the skeletal types of melodies. So overall for this second half, you're trying to keep your hands close to the keys, do some slow experimentation with when your right hand, or particularly in this one, right hand, but the left in that passage in 20. But when your left hand throughout, covers or comes down sooner than later. Large leaps. So bar 20, 1, 2, 3, 23. Bar 23, that E, I tend to want to put a little bit more of an accent on that E, because if I don't, it might not come out at all. So I might need to just really push my air a little bit to make sure that that E comes out. In bar 25, and so letting go, this is actually an interesting topic. If you press keys down, that is one motion. If you let keys up and open the hands, that is a different motion, a different physical motion. So when you, on bar 25, when you play the A sharp down to the F sharp here, you're letting go of your register key to get to the F sharp, but you're pressing this first finger down to a ring. So that's a lot of coordination for the hands, and there's a risk of putting another note in between. You can put all kinds of combinations of mistakes in there. So what I like to do there is almost flatten my hand a little bit. And if I leave my C sharp key down throughout this, not literally throughout, but I again, like I said earlier about experimenting with one side down sooner or the other side down sooner, I make the first C sharp a little lazy in getting off. Harmony changes. So we're in B minor right now, and let's see here. So essentially, what we did is, harmonically speaking, for those of you who have taken some music theory classes, the piece is in G major, then they go to the 5 of G major, D at bar 20, actually before 20, he resolves it at bar 16, 17, 18 at the 5, so now you're in 5, which is D major, and the relative minor of D major is B minor. So all of a sudden, at 26, we're outlining some chords in B minor, and we finally end this little excerpt of this piece in bar 31 in B minor. So all those non-key signature notes in there are all probably loosely connected with other chords in those other secondary keys. I say probably because I don't want to get into a harmonic analysis. I mean, there's a B flat, which you have some diminished 7th chords in there, and so we can maybe get into that at another point. Overall, for the execution of this second half of the piece, I want to recommend that you really work hard to keep your hands close to the keys, particularly your left hand. And also, another little trick, like I said with the right hand, pushing the right hand thumb up a little bit. Another trick that I like to use is to keep the pinkies on the low B and low C keys. And if I leave them there and try not to move them off the keys, and keep them touching when I'm practicing slowly, it helps the other fingers to stay closer. Phrasing wise, when I do this whole section from 20 that's too much at the end, because in the context of this piece, it goes on, but maybe a slight retard. Or if nothing else, I didn't even do a retard there, just a nice drive of the crescendo towards the end. Overall, let's just recap. So we're trying to get the tempo even, clear articulation, so when you have the end of a tied note to a dotted note following the tied note, shorten that tied note, that last tied note a little bit. Dee, da, da, da. So at that faster tempo, it sounds a little bit separated. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but be very light on your tongue pressure. Let the air do all of the work for you. Add some dynamics. Be musical. Be individual within the context and the framework of this piece. So it's telling us allegro risoluto, which is, you know, really quite even. I'll make it oversimplified for this particular piece. We're trying to see that one is trying to see that you can play evenly. But I keep saying we. I'm sorry. I'm not even judging these competitions this year. So I'm just speaking as a teacher. Add some shapes and some dynamics and individuality within the confines of keeping the phrasing going. Let me just give you one more quick example here. If I put it on 96, now I'm going to kind of stray a little bit away from the metronome, but try to mostly stay with it. Breath in the beginning to be able to put all that together. So again, I guess the other reminder is to take a very large breath. Swimmers do this where they take a very, very large breath, and I think they call it hyperventilating. So you're from down below, and then you breathe out. Second one out, and now you play. And you might do that before you walk into the audition room, or in this case, this year, I think we're doing these online, you might just, though, before you play it, take a couple of deep breaths. I hope that helps you. We kind of flew through this a lot, but choose a tempo that's comfortable for you. Do work on the second half a lot more than the first half, because it will require a lot of left hand work, and play your G major scale, and I think you'll be in good shape. I wish you all the best.